Can China really break through its way past the first island chain and storm into the open Pacific? Perhaps for a moment, maybe for a battle, but to break out in a strategic, sustainable way, that's a whole different story. Today, we'll break down why. Starting with geography, then ships, then logistics, and finally, politics. The first island chain isn't just a line of islands. It's a fortified maritime fence that hugs the very edge of China's coastline. It stretches from Japan and the Ryukyu Islands in the north, through Taiwan in the center, down across the Philippines and into Borneo and Malaysia in the south. This arc of land is more than geography. It's a wall of watchtowers. Whoever holds it doesn't just control the gateways to China's near seas. They decide whether China's Navy can stay bottled up at home or break out into the wider Pacific. China has spent decades preparing for a breakout. The People's Liberation Army Navy is now the largest fleet on the planet by sheer numbers, boasting aircraft carriers, modern destroyers bristling with missiles, a growing submarine force, and an arsenal designed to reach far beyond its shores. China's doctrine is clear: push against the first island chain, punch open gaps, and make the Pacific too dangerous for any adversary to enter. Punching through the first island chain is one thing, but keeping that door open is an entirely different battle. Picture a Chinese fleet forcing its way through the narrow gap between Taiwan and Luzon. For a moment, they've made it out into the Pacific. Victory, right? Not so fast. Because every drop of fuel, every round of ammunition, every single reinforcement now has to flow back through that same narrow corridor. It becomes a fragile lifeline, a thin artery stretching across hostile waters. And here's the danger. The moment an adversary targets that passage, whether with submarines, long-range missiles, or air power, the supply line snaps. A breakout isn't just about sailing out once, it's about holding open a highway through the middle of the most heavily monitored seas on Earth. And that's a challenge China has yet to prove it can solve. China's entire economy runs on ocean trade. Energy, food, raw materials, the lifeblood of its industry, all come by sea. More than 4/5 of its imported oil sales across distant waters, and much of it is funneled through one fragile bottleneck, the Strait of Malacca. That strait is barely a mile wide at its narrowest, and it's one of the most heavily monitored and most vulnerable choke points in the world. So imagine this. China fights its way past the first island chain, but in doing so, it exposes the very arteries that feed its economy. Tankers, container ships, supply vessels, all become high-value targets. A breakout that threatens those lifelines isn't a triumph. It's a gamble that could strangle China's economy before the war is even won. In blunt terms, a breakout without security isn't victory, it's suicide. To make a breakout permanent, Beijing would need far more than ships. Warships can punch a hole, but they can't keep it open. For that, China would need land. That means seizing and holding Taiwan, an island bristling with defenses and backed by international support. It means pacifying Luzon, the heart of the Philippines, home to over 60 million people and U.S. treaty commitments. And it means challenging Japan's home islands, a nation with one of the most advanced militaries on Earth. This isn't a quick naval raid, it's a monumental campaign of conquest, an occupation of hundreds of millions of people across multiple nations, in some of the most defended territory in the world. Every step would be met with resistance. Every beachhead would bleed resources. Every island would fight back. And instead of guaranteeing a breakout, Beijing could find itself trapped in a grinding war it cannot sustain. And China wouldn't face a single adversary. Across the Pacific, the United States keeps a forward-deployed presence, carrier strike groups, submarines, and bombers on standby. Japan and the Philippines aren't just neighbors, they're treaty allies, with forces trained and equipped to respond if the chain is threatened. Further south, Australia brings reach across the Indian and Pacific Oceans, while India's growing navy can pressure China from the opposite flank. Add to that the growing cooperation among these nations, joint exercises, shared intelligence, interoperable weapons, and any attempt to smash through the first island chain becomes far more than a duel at sea. It risks triggering a sweeping regional conflict, one that would pit Beijing against a coalition of capable, determined powers. Forcing the chain wouldn't just be hard, it could set off the very war China most wants to avoid. So what's the best case for China? A fleeting naval breakthrough, a window of access that's short-lived and fragile, dependent on luck and perfect timing. At worst, Beijing might gamble on a full-scale assault to seize territory along the chain. That would demand massive landings, long supply lines, and years of occupation, and almost certainly trigger worldwide backlash, sanctions, and the risk of a wider, costlier war. And there is a third path, the slow and patient grind. Build bases on remote reefs. Expand ports and runways abroad. Use Coast Guard cutters, militia vessels, and disinformation campaigns to wear down resistance without firing a shot. Influence creeps outward, step by step, until the map starts to tilt. But even that strategy is far from easy. Every new outpost invites countermoves from neighbors. Every gray zone tactic tests the limits of diplomacy and could backfire into open confrontation. Whether China chooses speed, shock, or stealth, each road is expensive, fiercely contested, and uncertain. There's no clean shortcut to breaking the first island chain. This contest isn't a simple clash of ships lining up at sea. It's a duel of technology, reach, and nerves. Long-range missiles challenge aircraft carriers before they can even see the coast. Drones sweep across the skies, probing radar nets and striking targets once thought safe. Silent submarines stalk merchant convoys and warships alike, threatening the arteries of trade. Satellites, cyber tools, and electronic warfare add yet another layer, turning every island, every stretch of water, into part of a complex sensor and weapons web. The first island chain is no longer just geography. It's a digital and kinetic battlefield where control is harder, more expensive, and far more dangerous for everyone involved. So, can China achieve a sudden breakout of the first island chain? Most likely. With enough firepower and surprise, China might force a temporary gap in the chain. But a lasting breakout, one that secures steady sea lanes, energy lifelines, and the arteries of global trade, is another matter entirely. That requires more than warships. It demands constant resupply, sustained dominance, and the occupation or neutralization of some of the most heavily defended territories on Earth. After breaking through the first island chain, China will have to face the full military might of the United States Navy, standing by within the second island chain defense. The cost implications for a naval battle at this scale is staggering. In blood, in treasure, and in the inevitable backlash from nations determined to resist. That's why the first island chain still stands as one of the most formidable barriers in modern strategy. Not just a geographic line of islands, but a living defense system where alliances, technology, and geography converge. A barrier that offers no easy answers and no cheap victories. Sustaining a breach of the first island chain is the real question here, and a very large task for China. Geography doesn't change, logistics don't forgive, and alliances across the Pacific don't simply disappear. That's the heart of this problem. Breaking the chain isn't just about fleets and missiles. It's about supply lines that stretch for thousands of miles, bases that must be defended, and neighbors who will fight just as hard to hold their ground. Even the slow game, creeping influence, gray zone tactics, bases on distant reefs, comes with costs, pushback, and risk of miscalculation. So while Beijing may find moments of opportunity, the long war of access and control still tilts against them. The first island chain remains a living barrier, part geography, part technology, part human determination, and it won't fall easily. But what do you think? Could a patient strategy eventually wear it down, or is the chain too strong to break without sparking a wider conflict? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If this deep dive helped you see the stakes more clearly, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who follows security issues in the Indo-Pacific.